Hello folks, this is Tony from Audio Basics. Today we're going to talk about all the different types of cables you might run into over the course of setting up and connecting your audio equipment. There are many different types of connections, and hopefully this guide will help you understand what you're working with or what you need to complete your setup. We will specifically be covering all known audio cables that are commonly used today, as well as your most popular speaker connections and basic power cables. I'm also going to go through all the different types of connections you may see when setting up audio equipment with your computer or laptop. Before we get into specific cables, let's go over what an audio signal is from an electronics perspective. Imagine a standard copper cable is a pipe full of marbles. The marbles in this case represent electrons. When you strum your guitar or speak into your mic, an electric signal is generated and more electrons are pushed into the cable. Naturally, the other end of the cable is going to push out electrons into whatever you've got it plugged into. This is how your cable transmits an audio signal. Now that we've got that out of the way. First, let's talk about quarter-inch cables. There are two main options for these, and they are balanced and unbalanced, commonly referred to as TS, tip sleeve, and TRS, tip ring sleeve. Unbalanced or TS cables are typically used for hooking up instruments, pedals, and many keyboards. You can see by looking at the connector that these have two conductors to carry your signal, the tip and the sleeve. They are commonly referred to as instrument cables. It's important to try to steer away from instrument cables that are longer than 20 to 30 feet though. After that, the cable can begin to act almost as a long antenna, and you are much more susceptible to line noise. If your electric guitar cable is noisy, it could be a bad cable, or it could be a lighting fixture in your room, or a power cable that's running too close to it, or even your mini fridge that's plugged into the same circuit. Now, let's look at quarter-inch TRS cables. There are two ways these are used in the audio world: headphones and balanced audio cables. These are the same size and shape as instrument cables, but this connector has three conductors. Why do we have three conductors here? For headphones, this is for your left, right, and ground signals. Pretty straightforward. Headphone jacks are typically only outputs and never inputs. As such, they kind of exist in their own little world here. However, three-conductor audio cables can carry what's called a balanced signal. A balanced signal has one conductor with your standard or positive audio signal, another with the exact opposite signal or negative, and then one common ground that the two signals share. When these three signals get combined at the other end of the cable is when the magic happens. The two opposite signals are compared, and by design, the circuit rejects all the extra line noise that may have been picked up by the cable along its route. This allows you to run balanced cables virtually any length up to 300 feet and even beyond. That all being said, you have to recognize that not all quarter-inch ports are balanced inputs or outputs. Usually the ones that are labeled as such. Both ends need to be balanced connections for you to be getting the benefits of using this particular cable. Most balanced connections will still work if you only use a TS cable on them, and vice versa. But please just keep in mind that if you can utilize them correctly, you are helping your equipment to fight background noise. And that's a fight we want to win. Next up are XLR cables. These are the connections used on a lot of equipment in pretty much all modern microphones. They have different male and female ends, so it's easy to keep track of which direction your signal is moving in. The connections also have a locking mechanism to make their attachment secure. XLR cables also carry a balanced audio signal, just like TRS cables. Most inputs at recording studios and on stages worldwide use this connection to interface with their audio systems. They are even available on small audio interfaces for incredibly low prices. Thanks, technology! Next are your 1/8 inch or 3.5 millimeter cables, commonly found on headphones, but the last few years has been showing up on small format synths and samplers. Just like the larger TRS headphone jacks previously discussed, these standard 3-conductor cables carry a left, right, and ground signal. There are cables that have an extra 4th conductor as well. This additional ring allows you to control the volume of whatever you've got your phones plugged into, if it is indeed compatible. Lastly, there are TS cables in this form factor as well. These are typically used for something like modular synthesizers and such. Do not accidentally buy one of these thinking it is to hook up your BlackBerry to your car stereo. Nothing bad is going to happen, it's just not going to sound right. Now let's get into some of the weird ones. The TT patch cable is a 3-conductor jack similar to quarter-inch balance connections. It's just physically smaller. These are typically used in patch bays and recording studios, etc., so you can fit as many connections in a small space as possible. RCA cables used to be the standard for hooking up lots of equipment, including turntables and home hi-fi systems, and in some cases still is. However, this is an unbalanced signal, and as such is not commonly used anymore in professional situations, unless it's something like a DJ setup. In a later episode, we will talk about converting unbalanced signals like these, or the ones from TS instrument cables, into a balanced signal using direct boxes. I'd like to note here that you may occasionally see an RCA jack that is labeled as SPDIF or digital out or in. This is not an analog audio signal, but instead a digital one. As such, it will only talk to another device that has the same digital format. DB25 ports are commonly used as interconnects in audio equipment as a way to connect multiple audio signals in a small physical space. Each one of these adapters can carry up to 8 channels of balanced audio. They are usually female on the equipment end, so the cables themselves are typically male. Many uses for these include breakout or fan-out configurations, where the other end of the line splits into 8 separate XLR or TRS jacks to interface with your other equipment. Now, there are a few digital connections you may encounter in the audio world, and I'm just going to run through them quickly so you know what you're looking at when you come across them. AES-3, or AES/EBU, is a digital format known for transmitting 2 channels of high-quality audio over several types of connections. The most common, though, is over an XLR connection with 110 ohms of resistance. Don't worry, these ports are always clearly labeled as digital or AES inputs on the hardware, so you can't easily mistake it for a standard XLR port. AES can also be transmitted over BNC cables, which you may see in the broadcast and video world as well. Speaking of BNC cables, these are commonly used in the audio world for word clock functions. Word clock is a time code used to sync all of your digital devices. If your equipment doesn't have this, don't worry. If anyone is interested in a video about digital clocks as they apply to the audio world, comment down below and maybe we'll get deeper into this subject at a later date. BNC cables can also be used in the AV world to transmit video signals. The last digital audio cable I want to show you is the Toslink or ADAT optical cable. These utilize a fiber optic connection to transmit up to 8 channels of audio. Don't kink these cables. If you split the fiber inside, they're basically useless. You might see these connections in audio interfaces as a means of expanding your channel count. Technology! Let's jump over to speaker cables real quick. One of the most common connections you may see in this world are your old school 1/4-inch TS speaker cables. These are usually labeled as speaker lines somewhere on the cable itself. They also typically have much more insulation on them and tend to be a thicker gauge than instrument cables. Another old school connection you may run into is the banana clip. These are used in studio monitors as well as large speaker cabinets from years past. It's an easy connection and still works great, you just don't see it as much in modern equipment. The most common passive speaker jack used today though is by far the Speak-On connector. These are a twist locking system that is very clean and reliable and easily serviceable. They do tend to cost a bit more than the other options, but they're very reliable for long periods of time, and you can fix them usually without having to bust out the solder gun. Okay, let's get into computer connections. Firstly, you've got your USB jacks or universal serial bus. There are a ton of different ones here, but we are going to focus on the ones you might run into the most in the audio world. Everyone knows the classic USB Type-A jack. The 2.0 and 3.0 variants are cross-compatible with each other, and the 3.0 ones tend to be colored blue. Some of the other ends you may find are the Type-B plugs, which tend to be on external devices, like a MIDI keyboard or your audio interface. Most of these will use the 2.0 Type-B plug specifically. Your Android phone might have the Type-B micro on it, and on external hard drives you may encounter the 3.0 Type-B plug or the micro Type-B in both 2.0 and 3.0 variants. The important thing to note here is that since USB 3.0 and up has faster transfer speeds, just make sure that your 3.0 device is plugged into a 3.0 port. Everything else should work fine. You're doing great. Sounds confusing because it is. Get it together, USB implementers forum. Oh wait, hold on. Looks like they are actually getting it together. Enter USB Type-C, a small port that fits on almost everything and is legacy compatible with all the older stuff too. Now, all we need is adapters, right? Hooray! Okay, on to Thunderbolt. You might see some interfaces with this connection built on it, built in the housing of the mini DisplayPort, but sporting this cool little graphic on it. This jack was used for both Thunderbolt 1 and 2. Devices using either of these formats are mostly cross-compatible. Easy! But wait, Thunderbolt 3 uses the same port as USB Type-C? That's right, these ports are physically identical to each other. All USB Type-C cables will work as Thunderbolt 3 cables, so nothing to worry about there. However, if your computer's USB-C port has the Thunderbolt logo, you can also hook up devices that are Thunderbolt 1, 2, and 3 compatible. USB-C has data transfer speeds up to 10 gigabytes per second, while Thunderbolt 3 can transfer up to 40. It's important to know the difference if you're purchasing an external hard drive or audio interface that is Thunderbolt. You want to make sure that it's going to work with your computer. You may run into these cables here and there too. It's called FireWire. These ports were around before Thunderbolt was a thing. Older Macs may have this jack, FireWire 800, or its predecessor, FireWire 400. You'll also see them on external hard drives and audio interfaces, but most modern products have moved on to Thunderbolt or USB 3. If you've still got a product with this jack, however, you can get adapters to plug it into your computer's Thunderbolt port. You're doing great. Ethernet, or RJ45 connections have a ton of uses nowadays, from software controllers to multi-channel digital audio distribution to just regular old internet connections. Some with software controllers, like the Avid Artist series, use the control format called Yukon, which is typically carried over Ethernet. Digital audio distribution systems frequently use formats such as Dante to connect all of your devices and route audio anywhere with little to no latency. And of course, hardwiring your computer to your home network through Ethernet is always the fastest and most dependable connection type to use for accessing the internets and your home network. There are several different iterations of the Ethernet cable with the same RJ45 end, but for most of your purposes, Cat5e or Cat6 will cover most of your bases for these applications. This is a MIDI port, Musical Instrument Digital Interface. This control format is used to transmit timing, note data, and parameter changes in real time between devices. It's been around since 1982 and hasn't changed much since then. Not that it needs to, because it's nearly perfect. I plan on making a separate video in the future about how MIDI works and where it is implemented today, but for now, let's talk about where you may see this in your travels. You may see MIDI ports on your audio interface, and it's on nearly every keyboard manufactured since the 80s. Many modern keyboards from the last 10 years or less, however, have a USB Type-B port that transmits MIDI directly to your computer. There are also a plethora of USB to MIDI interfaces in case your keyboard doesn't have this newer tech built in. Now, I'm just going to go through a few more cables that you may bump into around the house or studio just in case you run into them and aren't sure what they are. This is a lightning cable from your current iPhones and iPads. You can convert these to headphones or USB Type A or C for charging or data transfer. This is an HDMI cable. These transmit stereo audio and a video signal, most common for hooking up your computer, monitor, or TV. This is a DisplayPort cable. These are strictly video cables and are used also for your television and computer monitors. This is a DVI cable, and so is this, and this. There's a couple variations. I'm not going to get into it, but if you need to use this port, just make sure you buy the correct cable. It's for video. Here's a coaxial cable, used typically for home internet and to connect a cable box, if you still use one of those. Cable companies are the worst. You'll probably use this to connect to your modem so you can quickly get on Reddit and waste all of your time. Also, memes. Power cables. This is your standard IEC power cable, probably used by your desktop computer, TV, amplifier, rack equipment, etc. These bad boys are everywhere. They can be used interchangeably and even come in right angles. Don't break off the ground plug, you savage. There's an adapter for that. It's called a ground lift. Try it out if you're getting some buzz in your audio system at home or on your guitar amplifier. Don't use it on stage unless you know what you're doing. Getting shocked by a mic is not a fun time and is dangerous. Here are a bunch of proprietary power supplies I've got kicking around here at home. So many options. You want to make sure that you're using the right one for your right piece of gear. Label your power supplies with tape and Sharpie, or store them with the equipment when not in use. Nothing is worse than trying to find the right adapter for your modular synth in a pile of things that look exactly the same. One last thing I want to say about cables in general is to buy Neutrik ends. They manufacture some of the most well-engineered products in the audio world, and any cable that has their jack on the end is probably a decent purchase. I don't usually like to endorse specific brands or products, but this is an exception. I'm not saying there aren't other great brands out there, or that all other brands are the worst. Just pointing out that it's worth your time to see if an instrument or speaker or microphone cable you're about to purchase has Neutrik ends on it. And if it doesn't, don't buy it. Just kidding. Sort of. Alright, have I missed anything? Any cables and connectors that you still have questions about? Let me know in the comments if there's something I forgot about or glossed over too quickly. Follow me on Instagram for posts from gigs I'm at or have done over the years. Subscribe here on YouTube to stay informed and reinforce your audio basics. Thanks, and sound good.